Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 433 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book just came out. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, San Francisco is one of my all-time favorite cities. Maybe it's the delicious seafood. Maybe it's the cool weather. Maybe it's the stunning views. Maybe it's Alcatraz, or maybe it's all of it. Go spend time there and go and see Napa Valley as well while you're there. You won't be disappointed. Speaking of San Francisco, let's talk to our next guest. Irma Herrera is a civil rights lawyer turned playwright and solo performer, and she uses storytelling and theater to open hearts and minds. After 3 decades of working in pursuit of fairness and justice, she turned her attention to storytelling on stage. This work is an extension of her social justice advocacy, and she uses the skills developed as a lawyer to explore themes of othering and belonging. Her one-woman show is called Why Would I Mispronounce My Own Name? This is a work of creative nonfiction that is a mashup of personal narrative, lessons in American history, and stories about respecting people's names, even when they don't sound and look like real American names. Welcome to the show, Irma.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
It is great to be with you this morning. Your story is just fascinating. And I love that we were talking about language before we got started on this podcast, because I do have a few podcast episodes that talks about language. And I'm so glad that you found the one that you did. What's interesting is that studying languages and discovering how words from different languages connect, that seems to be something that you really, really enjoy, probably from a very young age as well. So when did you notice that you had this love of language?
I'm not sure when I noticed, but I grew up in a bilingual household.
Mhm.
I'm Chicana, Mexican American. My parents were born in the United States, but in South Texas, which I often refer to as Mex America, a lot of us grew up speaking Spanish. And then I've always known both English and Spanish. So I didn't have the experience of showing up at school not knowing a word of English, which is true of so many kids. I've always known both, but the language of our home was Spanish. And I think in high school, I studied French, and I began to see the commonalities between French words. They may not sound at all like the Spanish I knew, but I recognized the root. And then I had this goal of I wanted to speak 5 languages before I was 30. I didn't make it. I didn't make it, but I did study French, and I'm still studying French. And most of us do not learn a language in high school or college. Our language teaching is not so great in this country. And, it's really important to speak English because it's the language of the world. No matter where you go in the world, people speak English. Some people, not everybody, of course. So I've always been very fortunate that I was fluent in English, and also that I speak another language. And I did study Italian, which I speak fairly fluently. And recently, my husband and I went to Egypt, and I thought, well, I should learn a little bit of Egyptian Arabic, because Arabic has many different forms, and Egyptian Arabic is the most commonly used. And I didn't want to learn to write it, just to say a few things, to be polite, to be kind, and express my gratitude for the people who are showing us around. And it was so fun to see that some Spanish words have roots in Arabic. And of course, it's because Arabic people came to Spain, and people from Spain and Portugal came to the Americas. And so when we talk about globalization, yes, we're seeing it in steroids in our lifetime, but it's been going on for centuries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm
It's
so
been going
glad.
on for centuries. So I'm fascinated by all of that. So when I saw the commonalities in language, it just thrills me to no end. But I love just thinking about the way we use the English language and what words, how one word can change the meaning. When I was a young lawyer and I worked on cases involving language minority children, they used to be called, if you were not an English speaker when you got to school, you were called limited English proficient, LEP students. Today they're called English learners. That's a really different mindset,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Limited proficiency. Well, yes, you don't yet know English, but you're a learner. And I'm really a big fan of lifelong learning and engaging ourselves in the process of expanding our mind in whatever way we can with topics that interest us.
Mhm. I'm so glad that you had access to both English and Spanish as a young child. Growing up, for me, I had access to both Hebrew and English. Both of my parents happened to be Israeli, and they came to this country after serving in the Israeli army. And what was interesting was is that I have two younger siblings, and they really only spoke English to us because they felt that somehow their kids would be at a disadvantage if they didn't know English well. So they made this conscious decision to only speak English to the kids. Now, I went to a private Hebrew school from first through eighth grade. So luckily, I still have that ability to speak Hebrew and English. But my two younger sisters, they just went to regular public school. So they never had that opportunity to really understand both Hebrew and English. So anytime my parents would be fighting amongst themselves, my two younger siblings would say, "What did they say? What did they say?" And they'd ask for me to be the interpreter.
Well, speaking any other language is a gift. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what language it is. It just opens your mind in a different way. And of course, now there's research that people who are truly bilingual tend to develop things like dementia and Alzheimer's at a much later stage because it is preserving your brain.
That's great news. It's also really good for my daughter, who is studying both Spanish and French in high school, and she plans to continue that in college when she starts up this September. So that's always really
Good for
exciting.
her.
Yeah, it's fantastic. She really also has a love of language, and so we've embraced it, and it's been really good for her. And so yeah, that's wonderful. Now, the interesting thing about you is you actually decided to become an attorney. You attended Notre Dame Law School. What was the reason why you wanted to go into law?
I wanted to go into law because I am deeply passionate about justice and fairness. And I grew up in a community that was very segregated. Most people don't know that Mexican Americans in the Southwest experienced the same level of segregation and prejudice as our African American brothers and sisters. We had Jim Crow growing up. I mean, the laws had already changed, but it was very clear that Mexican Americans occupied a an inferior position in society and the community where I grew up. And as I saw the Black civil rights movement, I thought to myself, well, they're fighting for the same things we're fighting for. And I greatly admired both the preachers and the lawyers. Well, I sure wasn't going to become a preacher. And so I was drawn to law. Also, as a little girl, I was also speaking up for other people. When I saw something that was wrong, I was the kid who would say, that's not right. How come this or that? I think kids generally have a sense of fairness that's innate in us. If you have multiple children, I only have one, but you see it in young kids at schools that even as toddlers, if you're with a group of toddlers and one of them gets something and others don't, they speak up. It's like, well, she didn't get one, right?
Mhm,
And so I am really passionate about promoting fairness and equality. And the law was a great tool for giving voice to the needs of my community. And so as a young lawyer, I worked first because I speak Spanish. I
mhm.
was able to work representing Spanish speaking farm workers in Washington State. And then I moved to San Francisco to work with the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That was and is the premier Latino civil rights organization in the country. And it was a wonderful experience to work on civil rights cases. But I also had a level of frustration because we would win cases, but there was so much misunderstanding about what we were seeking to do in the cases we brought. And that led me to journalism. And I remember I was working on a desegregation case in Denver, but we represented the limited English proficient children who weren't getting their needs met educationally. And we got a good decision from a federal district judge. And one of the Denver papers has an article, an op-ed or an editorial that says, oh, these out-of-state lawyers, because we were in San Francisco, don't want these kids to learn English. Well, that's not true. As we started this conversation, the importance of learning English in this country to success is key, right? Communication is key. You have to speak good English. So I went back to the office in San Francisco and I was complaining that what's the point of winning cases if in the court of public opinion, people don't get what you're doing? And so the person who was head of media said, why don't you write an op-ed about that and I'll try and place it in a newspaper? I said, okay. So I wrote this piece and she placed it in the New York Times. So I thought, okay, I'm going to quit my job and become a writer. And indeed I did. I saved money and I quit my job and I traveled and then I worked as a freelance writer. I also had a little gig with a news service that I would write a couple of articles a month. And I wrote about law, I wrote about culture, I wrote about the rise in Spanish language advertisement billboards at the same time as there were moves afoot in Congress and local legislatures to ban the use of Spanish in official. And I've always been interested by the conflicts that we see in American society and how we resolve them and how we try and change the reality. For example, we've always had gay people in the world, right? And then as we see more rights giving people in the LGBTQ plus community greater protections, then we see a pushback. It's like, no, we don't want people, we don't want gay characters in our books that our children are reading. Well, why not? They're part of our community, right? And so in terms of my legal work, I'm passionate for civil rights and equality, but not just for my group, for any group. You know, Dr. Martin Luther King said an injustice anywhere, I forget the exact quote, but an injustice is an injustice. It doesn't matter who it's happening to, and we should speak up. And that's what I seek to do now using theater.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And you do this one woman show. It's called Why Would I Mispronounce My Own Name? Where did you get the idea to create this show and what is it all about?
Yeah. So I practiced law for all these years. Then I was going to take a year off to work on a novel I had started many years earlier.
Mm.
And so I was working on this novel and I just wasn't feeling it. And a friend of mine who happens to be a medical doctor, but also a fabulous writer and a playwright, she said, take this class with me. It's so much fun. The guy who teaches it is so good at helping you connect with your stories. So I signed up for this theater class called Telling Our Stories. And I didn't know what to expect. It was a chance to hang out with my friend. And I fell in love with the art of storytelling. And every class was once a week. You showed up and you stood up in front of 10 people or 5 people, whoever was there, telling a story. And often my stories were about something that had outraged me, the mispronunciation of someone's name, maybe. So when Federico Peña, he was the Secretary of Energy and the Secretary of Transportation, often in the media, he was called Frederico Pina. Well, Pina is pineapple. That wasn't his last name. It's Peña. It's not so hard, right?
Mm.
And so I would just yell at the radio or the TV and say, he's the secretary of a big department in this country. Why can't they get his name right? They get Francois Mitterrand's name right. They get all these French names right. Why is it so hard for them? And who are the editors that are letting these things go through? And so it became apparent that there was a theme that I cared about that I wanted to talk about. And it was about prejudice and who gets respect and who doesn't in American society. So the use of stories about names was the entry point to telling my stories. But in my solo show, I deal with the history of Mexican Americans in the Southwest, the civil rights movement in the United States, the Muslim ban when it came in. I want people to understand that sometimes the group that's the receiving end of prejudice changes, but the hatred that's fomented against groups is the common theme. When immigrants came from Europe, from Italy, from Germany, there used to be German bilingual schools, and then they got rid of them. There used to be Swedish bilingual schools. And so when the Irish came, they were looked down as inferior. When the Italians came, they were looked down as inferior. And then at some point, this great melting pot theory, they became white. But that's not true of all groups. And also, we live in different times where today we embrace our background rather than try and erase it. It's like, yeah, I'm South Asian and I'm Hindu or I'm whatever. And I don't have to feel that that's not okay. I can be who I am and be part of this great American experiment in creating a multicultural society where we live in relative peace and give each other the opportunity to be our best selves.
I want to drill down on this a little bit more because, my wife and I, we talk about this quite often. I have a lot of relatives who died in World War II and the Holocaust. And so, whenever I'm talking about my family history, that's a piece of me that I bring. We were talking about Nazi Germany, right? How could that happen, right? How could we persecute one particular group like that to the point where we're literally sending millions of Jewish people to their death, right? And then I start thinking about what's going on in this country today, right? So help us connect all of these dots, right? You mentioned the Muslim ban before. I know you're very familiar with the racializing of COVID-19 and the rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. And today we even have laws that are targeting trans youth as well. So how are all of these things related?
They are related. We start by demonizing people.
Mhm.
We demonize entire groups. 1 second, there's a loud. Mark, can you lower it? I'm on a podcast. Sorry about that.
You're okay. Go ahead.
Well, let me say that many years ago, I visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And
Yes.
I think at that time you walk in and you see a bunch of shoes and you see
Mhm.
all these things. Then you see how things began to change in Germany, how we required people or we banned them from certain jobs. We
Mhm.
required them to be identifiable as Jewish. Um, the fear we create fear about the other. And so in Germany and some other places, it was Jews, it was the Roma, it was people who were gay, it was anybody that was identifiably different got labeled. And we started seeing this in the United States, especially around the Latino community. They're criminals,
Mhm.
um, they're full of diseases. They don't want to learn English. They're not part of our culture. They're never going to fit in. And you start seeing that the images that get portrayed, and you see, especially in certain television channels and networks, are all very negative images of these people. I had an incident involving me. I tell it in my one woman show at the time when they were passing the anti-immigrant laws in Georgia, Alabama. I called a legislature I wanted to interview. And when I gave my name and I used the pronunciation, I used Irma Herrera, the operator at the state legislature said, "That is not an American name. I cannot talk to you."
Wow.
She hung up on me. I'm a journalist in San Francisco
Wow.
covering a story about anti-immigrant sentiment. She assumed I was an undocumented immigrant, I guess, and she thought she couldn't talk to me because the laws that got passed, most of them were by the courts found to be unconstitutional, said you couldn't give a right to someone who was undocumented. you couldn't do all these things. That's how it starts. And it starts by caricaturing people. If you've studied the Holocaust, you can see that there were posters that were being put up that had a caricature of who Jews were. And, some of those things are still alive and well and thriving in this country and elsewhere. And we've seen a huge spike in anti-Semitism, especially with what's going on in Israel and Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all ugly and bad,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it
Mm-hmm.
affects people very negatively. So I think we have to be mindful of how how we go down this slippery slope towards a society that's filled with hate and demonizing and attributing our problems to a group of people.
Yeah, well said. Really, really good. It brings me to this concept of identity. When I think about my own identity, I think about being a New Yorker, being Israeli, being Jewish, being a speaker, being a fraternity man. So I think about all of these things, and you say that you have multiple identities as well that are indivisible. At all times, you were all of these. You are Chicana, Latina, Madre, lawyer, playwright, writer, stand-up comic, feminist, and much more. So when you say all these pieces of your identity are indivisible, what do you mean by that?
Well, you hear the word intersectionality,
Hmm.
right? That sort of was coined in the legal framework of when people experience discrimination. There have been cases where it's like, well, you didn't experience discrimination because the person who was acting against you was also Black. It's like, yeah, but that Black person was a very light-skinned Black person, and I happen to be a dark-skinned Black person who comes from a lower income community as opposed from someone who is from a professional class, multiple generations. It's like all of our identities are tied up into one, and we sometimes experience discrimination that it's hard to tease out. And discrimination either positively or negatively, like some people, we have stereotypes about some people that work in a favorable way, supposedly, such as, oh my God, how can my kids compete against these Asian students? Have you heard that?
I have heard that.
They are so super smart and they've
Mhm.
got tiger moms and everybody, and they're getting all this tutoring. And my kid's never going to get into an Ivy League college because it's going to all of these Asian kids. So sort of a positive stereotype, but it really isn't. And we need to learn to judge people as individuals, but an individual has multiple identities, just like you gave yours as being several things.
Yep.
Like, are you more Jewish than you are a Southerner now that you live in Atlanta? I mean, in Nashville?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a
You're all
great
those
point.
things, right?
Yeah.
And so wanting to understand who is the whole composite of who Mike is. So I have a favorite bumper sticker I want to show you. Have you seen that?
Never. I haven't seen that yet.
Well, the first time I saw it in a car, I don't actually have it in my car. I have it here in my desk. Don't believe everything you think.
Hmm.
We grow up with so many beliefs that we didn't have a choice about whether we were going to have that belief. It came with our family, it came with our community, it came with our region of the country. And what I love to do when I talk with folks, and it's part of my play, is to challenge what people believe. And there are things that we believe that just aren't true, but we make generalizations. It's how we make sense of the world. So I used to lead a women's rights organization, and all the lawyers in my office were women. I started that job when my son was maybe 4 years old. And when he was in first grade, he came home one day, he goes, Mommy, even a man can be a lawyer. I said, of course, a man can be anything he wants, just like a woman. He said, I didn't know that, but Brennan's dad is a lawyer. I said, yes, I know him. And he made that assumption because every lawyer he ever met was a woman when he
Hmm.
came to my office. My spouse is not a lawyer, right? So in his world, lawyer was a woman's job, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I had to disabuse him of that. So when we talk about representation, yes, representation does matter because we make assumptions about the world based on what we see around us.
Right.
And
100%.
if you see only images of brown people, like what we're seeing at the border, brown and black people who have been traveling for days, who are not bathed, who are weary, who look bedraggled, and you assume that every Latino, every Black person, every immigrant who wants to come to America is really a threat to our nation's security, you're going to want to keep them out.
Hmm.
And that's a microcosm of humanity that is faced certain situations that caused him to take these big risks of coming to this country.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anyhow, we've got so many issues that we need to be thinking about. How do we create a compassionate society? How do we create a compassionate family unit?
Well, how do we do that? I mean, if we talk about many of our listeners are in fraternities and sororities. Some of them are in traditionally white fraternities and sororities for the last 100 years. And some of them have, some of these organizations have been accused of racism.
Mhm.
So, I guess that is the question. How can we as individuals, what can we do to create organizations, let's say on college campuses, that are more diverse than ever? I mean, you understand the
Mhm.
demographics of today's college students. How can we create organizations that treat everybody with respect and dignity?
Well, I think it starts with educating ourselves. And if you do not have an understanding of our nation's history and the role that slavery played in creating this very successful economic engine that is America and has had so much power in many, many spheres, you're losing out on an important part of learning who we are as a country and how we can become better. So part of it is educating yourself. We have access to education 24/7 that's free in the internet, but you need to get it from sources that are legitimate. There's wonderful books, there's wonderful movies. The book Cast, for example, by Isabel Wilkerson, who won a Pulitzer Prize for The Warmth of Other Suns, that talks about the Great Migration and how in the United States we basically have had a caste system based on skin color and your position as either having been an enslaved person or not. And so it starts with educating ourselves and also by asking ourselves, well, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be a person that's filled with hate and distrust of other people? I don't think most of us want to be that kind of person. And you learn so much by befriending people who are different from you. And different from you can be racially, ethnically, socioeconomic class, religion. And to approach these friendships with an open mind about like, wow, first and foremost, we're all people, right? We love, we feel pain, we feel jealousy, we feel all these human emotions. It doesn't matter what your background is. We have that in common. And that was so interesting to me. I didn't have a white friend till I was a junior in college. My world was entirely Mexican American. So I have a 31-year-old son. He happened to have gone to a French bilingual school because I wanted him to grow up bilingual. Um, and I didn't much care which language. I would have preferred Spanish, but there was no Spanish bilingual school in the community where I lived. And as a child, he had friends whose families spoke other languages, who had different socioeconomic backgrounds. Uh, when he was maybe 10, a friend of his was coming over after school and he goes, Mom, Amar's coming for after school and he'll have dinner with us. Don't make pork
Mhm.
because he's Muslim. I thought, oh my God, I didn't know what a Muslim was till I was a grown up. And already as a kid, he knew. And I tell him that is such a gift to grow up around people so different from you and to learn that people have different customs, different religions, different language families they grew up in, and that you see each other as friends and peers.
Yeah,
I
really
love
well
that.
said. I love it. I love it. Now, I know San Francisco, I'll tell you, is one of my favorite cities. Certainly has tons of culture, which is one of the great things about San Francisco. But, I'm always concerned with where am I going to go to eat? Okay. I like to eat. I like all different kinds of food. So the next time I'm in the area speaking, where should I go for a great meal?
Well, first call me, I'll take you. I love Mexican food. I sometimes say, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm Mexican. We have the best food."
Yeah.
But then I'll eat Vietnamese food or Thai
Oh,
food or
good.
Japanese food,
Oh,
and I'll say,
yeah.
"Oh, I love this food so much."
Yeah.
There's lots of wonderful restaurants in the Mission in San Francisco. I
Yes.
love a place called Chavas,
Okay.
Chabas. That's a little hole in the wall, but they have great birria, which is goat meat, which
Mhm.
I love. They have great tacos. They have great chile relleno, whatever you like. They have really good food. But wow, are we blessed in the San Francisco Bay Area with just food from all over the world, the highest quality, authentic food. I just down the street from me, we have all kinds of wonderful restaurants. It's a wonder we ever cook.
Yeah, exactly. I love that variety. That's probably another reason why I love San Francisco is because I can get all the variety in food that I really crave. I'm somebody that grew up in New York City in Manhattan. And so, in Manhattan, I mean, you get access to everything.
Yeah.
And that is what I really miss. I mean, listen, I love being in Nashville, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have the variety that I seek in New York or San Francisco. And
Well,
so,
you may not have the great immense variety of a
yeah,
New York or San Francisco, but Nashville has become very diverse. I took my
yes,
plate to Nashville last year. I performed at TPAC
yes.
and I visited Nashville several times and I loved your city.
Yes, it's a wonderful city, and you're right. There are a lot of really, really talented chefs that are coming in and are bringing just wonderful food. So it is getting better in terms of the variety, which is great, and the quality of the food is very good. But like, there's certain things I can't get, like bagels and pizza from New York.
Yeah.
These are things that I really crave, but I just can't find the real deal in Nashville. Now, if you want barbecue, there's wonderful barbecue in Nashville, but
Oh, yes.
so, you have to make do with what you got. And then I go to San Francisco or New York when I'm feeling adventurous in the food realm. So that's really good. All right. So I'll definitely check that out. Fantastic. If they want to hire you as a speaker on their college campus, or maybe they want to see your one-woman show, it's called Why Would I Mispronounce My Own Name, on their college campus, where should they go to connect with you, Irma?
If you go to my website, irmaherrera.com, you can connect to all my social media. And I am performing in college campuses, and I find that so rewarding. Last year, I performed in two campuses in Texas, and I'm going to Princeton in next month. I'm going to perform my play at Princeton. And later this year, I'll be performing at Trinity University, which is in San Antonio. There's another Trinity somewhere on the East Coast, but
Yes, Trinity
I think that's
College.
Trinity College. This is
Yes.
Trinity University. So on my website, and I also do a 1 to 2 minute storytelling. It's in my stairwell of my home. So it's called my Stairwell Teatro. And I tell stories about names that don't fit into my play. For example, I'm doing a little series on the word Latinx because some people love it, some people hate it. And I'm just like digging into, well, why did people come up with this term and what does it mean and who uses it? And it's all to lead us to talk about how do we include people? Is it inclusive? Is it elitist? And perhaps it's all those things. But most importantly, when you meet somebody, how do they refer to themselves? And that's the thing about my name theme in my play. Why would I mispronounce my own name? Now, I won't mispronounce my own name, but if somebody wants to call me Irma, I have no control over how they say my name. I would like them to say Irma, but if they don't want to, it's on them. If they want to show respect to me, they'll try at least to say it correctly.
Mhm.
But why would I mispronounce my own name? And I meet so many people who say, you know what? I've been mispronouncing my own name for other people's convenience. I
Yeah.
don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And earlier we talked about whether you want to be called Mike or Michael, right? And
Yeah.
you don't have to be an ethnic or have an unusual or uncommon name to deserve the respect. There's people who are named Alexander who don't want to be called Alex. There's Kirsten and Kirsten, and often we get the names confused. And if I call you Kirsten and you tell me your name is Kirsten, I don't take offense in telling you, well, this is America. Actually, Kirsten and Kirsten are not American names. They come from the Scandinavian countries, right? Nobody will complain about that. But for some people with Latino names, I have been told, this is America, say your name in English. It's like, well, do you tell Bianca that she has to call herself white? Because the word Bianco means white in Italian.
Right? So true.
Only Bianca is the feminine version. And it reminds me of this joke that a comedian said. He says, my name is Miles. If I go to England, do you think someone there is going to tell me, oh, here, we'll need to call you Kilometer? No, that's not how names work. So respect starts with learning a person's name.
I love it. Very, very good. This is really great conversation. I absolutely love the play, and I think you're going to be on college campuses all across the country. So I can't wait for all of that. Trinity University has fantastic students. I've spoken both there and at Trinity College, which is in Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
Yeah, and so both colleges have amazing students. I can't say enough good things about both places, but you're really going to enjoy
And I'm excited to go to Princeton.
Yes, Princeton. I mean, fantastic, fantastic school. So all good things ahead. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all this great information with us, Irma. I really
And thank
appreciate
you
it.
for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, Mike.
Yes, it has been a lot of fun. And to our listening audience, if you enjoyed this conversation with Irma, I want you to like it and I want you to share it with other students on your college campus. We can't wait to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.